BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Well, it is another NFL Sunday, and I might be from West Virginia, but I'm a New York Giants fan, so I would like to congratulate the Giants on another hard-fought loss to the Detroit Lions. Yeah, the Giants are so bad this year, and last year, and the year before last. They are overall just a bad team, but you gotta stand by your team until the end. And I digress from that, and we're going to get more to the subject of today's upload. And that's going to be kind of starting from something that I had been watching after the game. I started watching a few videos from the channel that's run by Dr. Todd Grande. We've talked about him a little bit before when we were doing the Chris Watts upload, and he mentioned some things about a channel that I had watched a few times called The Rewired Soul, and he did a critique of that. And if you haven't seen anything from The Rewired Soul, you can keep listening because we're not really going to focus so much on their specific material, but more just about how do people present psychology and information and things on the internet. Now, I've talked a lot about psychology on this channel, and psychopaths and narcissism and all of those things, and I think it's kind of very important to say, though, the reason I talk about this is I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist or a med student or anything, not even close. And you're kind of beginning to wonder about how should people be viewing these subjects on the internet. First and foremost, I would say that I think that I'm just very glad that I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist or something talking about these things, because when you're listening to something on YouTube, Dr. Todd Grande says you need to differentiate it sort of between entertainment and education. Like, if you're listening to someone on YouTube, maybe like me, who is not, coming from any sort of traditional academic background, he says that that's just entertainment, and it really shouldn't be viewed as education. I kind of disagree with that. I really don't believe that that's an appropriate dichotomy, that like watching a YouTube series is just entertainment or education. This channel that we're running right here, this is like a social commentary channel, and I would almost say that commentary is kind of its own separate sort of entity and all that. It's like, because as, someone who's putting out content, you have a certain responsibility to be accurate all the time. I don't really think there's any sort of excuse for being inaccurate, other than that just the internet is very vast and it takes time to learn all of the things. And many times I've had to correct myself about things that I've been talking about with true crime cases. But I think there's a certain sense of value hearing the commentary from someone who is not coming from like the traditional background of a psychologist, because you don't start thinking in that very specific way. You don't really just follow the traditional means of labeling. You can think outside the box, as well as maybe you can kind of understand the situation in a different way. And those are a lot of the things that we try to do. Although, a few people who have written in to the channel saying that they are, psychologists, and some people who are also forensic investigators, they greatly disagree with my conclusions, but, bring it on, let's have some discussions. This is just a YouTube channel. And first and foremost, I am not famous, so you also have some liberty there where it sounds kind of weird, but it's like I actually kind of like not being famous, because I just feel that there is so much unrestricted freedom that you have to put stuff out online, and you also just don't really have to deal with a whole lot of backlash. And even if I make a mistake, all right, only a few people saw it, so let's just try to do better next time. So there's a certain thing with that. But when we're looking at the internet, there's a lot of people often use the metaphor about something is a toolbox. They're sort of saying that like it's a toolbox or a tool chest. You have many different things that you can use, and you can build something constructive, or you could pick up a hammer and use it as a weapon. And that's kind of the way that the internet can sort of be. It can be very destructive, and it can be very constructive, and you gotta just sort of sift through a lot of it. One of the things, though, that I really don't hear a lot of people talking about online is just about how the internet can be used to sort of provide kind of a hands-on, first-hand sort of sense of education in terms of awareness. It can provide awareness education. What do I mean by this? Well, once you sort of start interacting with people online, you feel less alone. And I don't mean that literally. You feel like you are not as weird as you thought you were. Oh, wow, there's so many other people out there that are just as weird as me. There's so many people out there who are just as crazy as me. And, like, it kind of provides a sense of normality to it all, if I'm using that word correctly. One time, back when I was about 20 years old, somebody told me that they thought that I was a schizophrenic, or I'm going to become a schizophrenic because I don't talk to a lot of people. And I was just like, well, just for that reason alone, they said that I was going to be a schizophrenic because, I'm not super outgoing and I'm very introverted. But I was like, well, to me that just sounded like, what are you talking about? It doesn't mean you're a schizophrenic just because you don't talk to that many people. And once you get on the internet, you find that there are 100 million other people out there who do not talk to that many people, and they're also not schizophrenic. There are 100 million people out there that are also kind of going through what you're going through. Because I don't know about you guys, when we start following true crime cases, I look back on life and I sort of feel like, wow, I was almost borderline for being some type of serial killer or something like that. And then you start reading the stories from other people. Countless people also feel like they were borderline for becoming like a serial killer, or they have all these types of very similar traits, because the fact of the matter is, many of us are messed up in some way, and that's sort of why there is this type of cottage industry going on of kind of YouTube psychologists that sort of talk about dealing with things like, especially the narcissist channels out there, that are kind of getting people to sort of explore, like, how do you deal with narcissists in your life, because there are so many of them, and even for people who sort of have these kind of narcissistic tendencies themselves, or might have some sort of psychopathic or sociopathic tendencies themselves. And it's just, it's like you really learn, though, that these things are not meant to be, you're not really meant to make light of them. And like if someone does have that kind of thing going on, but you also learn that there are just many more people like you. And this even can be dealt with much simpler things, like the kind of music you like that none of your friends listen to, the kind of movies you watch that no one you know has seen. You can find someone online who is a fan of all this stuff, and you really feel less alone. And that's one of the things that I think is very rarely talked about online. We often have these conversations when it comes to something like online dating, when they're like, the whole reason why people date on the internet is because you're not connected to your geographic area. You can meet someone outside of your geographic area. And first and foremost, if someone's on an online dating site, they should have the expectation that they are online for dating. Of course, some people, mostly women, only get on dating sites for friendship, or maybe they are in a relationship and they're just bored. I don't know too many guys that do that, but maybe some guys do that stuff as well. So when we're looking at the internet, it really is a toolbox. And we talked about this during the missing persons case upload that we did, the odd facts about missing persons, about how there is a lot of really dangerous stuff online. And even during the Madeleine McCann uploads, when we were mentioning things about the dark web, about how there are certain website portals that exist where you can't access them from like a traditional browser. It's almost like kind of an unlisted link, and only if someone has shared the link with you that you can enter into this very heavily guarded, like what kind of website area that is available for child sex trafficking. And these things do exist, and there are elite pedophile rings. It's not only the conspiracy theorists out there who are talking about it. These things are somewhat real. The internet can be a very dark and terrible place at the same time. That's why they call it the dark web, the dark net, and all of those things. So it's like, life really can be just, there's a lot of nastiness in life, but there's also a lot of treasure. There's a lot of junk and there's a lot of treasure. When it comes to the concept, though, of craziness, I would really say, though, that some points that were mentioned in Dr. Todd Grande's kind of video about the rewired soul were sort of talking about how psychologists and psychiatrists approach many different subjects. And I really say, though, just from my own personal experience and also from reading stuff and watching things online, once again from the total social commentary standpoint, is that they really do have like ways of just categorizing people and labeling people. And I think that it really goes to a bit of an extreme almost sometimes when it terms like, the kind of traditional definition of what they think a normal person is really doesn't cover that much. When I was listening to the YouTuber Daniel Mackler, who's a former therapist, he said, though, if people exhibit abnormal behavior, maybe I didn't say that word clearly, abnormal behavior, then they are more likely to be diagnosed as psychotic. I don't know how he got to that conclusion. He's a former therapist, though, but he didn't provide any specifics in that particular video about why that would be the case. But I can sort of follow where he would be coming from, because, I mean, if people, once again, do not meet that conventional definition of normal, then that is viewed as something that really just needs to be eradicated. And one thing that I've never completely understood about psychology is, it seems like if somebody has a mental condition, then the psychologist or the psychiatrist almost tries to break down the person down to zero and then kind of rebuilding up there. And this also happens with drug addicts. They said this a million times on Intervention, like that show about addiction. Jeff Van Vonderen, the interventionist, would just say an addict will only get better if they hit rock bottom first. I mean, like, what is this concept in the Western world about if a person is in a bad state, then they have to get worse before they get better, or they have to get down to zero before they can start again? I've never been completely convinced that that's the case, where, like, and I do mean this, like, when you sort of really follow the literature, I mean, people even describe things about, and by the literature, I mean the sort of things like the patients sharing their stories. There's some great forums out there online, and, like, I mean, I followed that stuff about 10 years ago, so I'm a little rusty on the URLs available for it. But it's like, when you hear the stories, it's like people are just sort of saying that, like, the psychiatrist is borderline verbally abusive, like extreme cases of manipulation, intimidation, coercion, all of these things that we are trying to get people to stop doing, but it's just like they're experiencing this type of behavior from a doctor or from their therapist themselves, and they're just wondering, like, well, what on earth is going on? And it seems to be that model. That was kind of a consistent thing that I noticed. And it wasn't my own original observation. Somebody who was, like, not a psychologist, but studying to be a psychologist about 10 or 15 years ago told me that they're just like, the objective is to break the person down to zero and then to try and rebuild up from there. And I just can't comprehend that, because that just sort of seems like you don't know how to fix the problem, so you got to make it worse before and then try and make it better. Like, by breaking someone down, we mean, like, really just kind of doing whatever you have to do to make a person submissive, no matter what. And that just sounds kind of bizarre. I mean, that definitely doesn't sound like something that is necessary. I mean, there's that expression, right? You ever heard, if there is a will, there is a way? So that also exists. But, I mean, it's just something that I've been quite curious about. And once again, like, I'm not a professional. I'm just someone who kind of reads stuff on the internet. And when you do have, like, kind of things that you're just curious about, you can kind of connect with people, as we mentioned, through forums or even through other YouTube channels in the comments section and such. You can sort of see people who are sharing a lot of things that are kind of atypical, especially when it comes to, like, something about, we got, like, things like homicidal ideation and such. Jordan Peterson, the psychologist who's very famous online, used to say that he would vividly fantasize about stabbing another student in the neck. And I was just listening to a lecture from Steven Pinker. He was promoting his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, and he said that 75% of men experience homicidal ideation, 35% of women experience homicidal ideation, meaning thinking about killing somebody that they don't like, and everybody else is lying. So it's like, those things would be completely discouraged from anyone associated with the medical community. Dr. Drew did something even on his show about just sort of saying that stuff is absolutely unacceptable and you need to call 911 immediately if you're ever even thinking in that way. But then when you look at the stuff that's available in terms of media, people are kind of coming at it from the perspective of, or not really just a perspective, they're really just kind of sharing the experience of, this is actually much more normal than you think. Things like if someone has a thought of killing someone or killing themselves, it doesn't mean that they're completely crazy. It's actually somewhat normal. And I believe that that's perhaps what Daniel Mackler was trying to express when he sort of made that comment about how if someone is exhibiting abnormal behavior, they're more likely to be diagnosed as psychotic. But I'm just guessing because he didn't specify in his video. So I think that there is a certain sense of value in like using the internet as a way to just kind of feel more normal. And if anyone ever has a certain type of intrusive thought or something, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are an extreme clinical psychotic and the only answer is to get loaded up on Seroquel or something like that. I mean, there are people who kind of like can have a different pathway. One of the things, though, that Todd Grande was talking about was like just kind of about alternatives to psychiatric medicine. And I thought that he was going to say something, but like I was waiting for it, but then it didn't happen. I thought that like a challenge that was going to come up was that psychologists and psychiatrists really try to avoid alternative methods. And I thought he was going to say that, but then that didn't happen. And that's one of the things, though, that I have noticed as well, that alternative methods really do not seem to be accepted at all in like the psychological community. And I don't really know too much about this firsthand, other than the fact that they aren't really kind of welcome to be explored. And once again, I mean, by alternative methods, I mean, we mean sort of like mostly changing lifestyles, diet and exercise, and I don't really know, though, like, when it comes to things like depression or even sort of bizarre behavior, I will tell you, I don't think I've ever been depressed if I've been getting what I wanted in life. I mean, so much is, like, connected to your environment, the people that are around you, and there is that very famous expression that, of course, I heard on the internet. I think I read it in a meme. Before you diagnose yourself with depression, make sure you're not surrounded by assholes. And so, stuff like that is true. I don't think I've ever been in a good situation and like living in a good lifestyle and ever felt anything bad. And that's what Jordan Peterson tries to convey in some of his lectures when he's like, if someone needs antidepressants, you'll know if it works in a month. But who needs them? That would be somebody like, for example, someone who has a good career, someone who has a good relationship, someone who is in a very good place in life. They have the apartment that they want to live in, but they're still feeling this very heavy form of depression. Those are really the types of people that need to be put on antidepressants. And once again, you'll know if it works within a month. And when you actually do pick up a book in a medical library, like you can do this, like go to the libraries at the med school and such, and just start reading them for yourselves. And you read like about sort of how simply things are diagnosed and they're prescribed. Psychotic major depression, also known as major depressive disorder with psychotic features, is diagnosed with a 10-point questionnaire. And if you get 6 out of 10, well, then you have psychotic major depression. You have major depressive disorder with psychotic features. And also, the way that kind of like psychosis is treated in the medical world, once again, this is just something that I read in a book from the medical library, is you put them on the antipsychotic for 3 months, and you put them on the antidepressant for 6 months. Unless the symptoms persist, then you kind of extend that as needed. It's just like, I mean, like, once again, I'm just reading this out of medical textbooks, and I'm like, that's it? That's it? That's why you go to medical school? And no, it can't be that simple. And that's only me, as an uneducated layperson, just picking up a book in a medical library, like an introduction to psychiatry or whatever it was, just because I was curious about the subject. But you do find things like that, and, I mean, you find very simple things that just makes you kind of question. But there's a very big thing, though, that we should kind of say about the concept of alternatives when it comes to the psychological process that you only really hear about from the internet. And I really think that a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists downplay the concept of seasonal affective disorder. Almost certainly, for me, the only times that I've really found depression in my life, except for maybe like once or twice, were when it was the months of like September and October. And I think seasonal affective disorder is very real. It's like that it's really the change from summer to fall that really seems to bring a lot of people down. And we even talked about on this channel a little how most serial killers or most mass murderers operate in August. And like that's like the kind of peak time. I don't know if it's a connection because August is a very hot month for many people. I'm not sure if it has to do with back to school season, and it's a frustrating time for many families. I mean, I never liked going back to school. I liked some of the preparations involved with it, but I know I never liked going back to school. So I can definitely see why many people would be absolutely pissed off with that. I don't know about Psychotic. I mean, I certainly never killed anyone over it, but I can definitely understand why that would be something downtrodden, for lack of a better term. And the only kind of other thing to say about that is, I think that things like that are really kind of neglected in the discussion, just about how much of our natural world is being neglected from the conversations about psychology and psychiatry. The internet absolutely loves that stuff. You can look at websites like Natural News, and you can find a bunch of absolute garbage, though. Absolute horse shit. I mean, I hate Natural News, I'm sorry, but I do. That's a terrible publication, because they put out just misleading things. They're all just like, keep your kids away from vaccines, to stuff that's all tied into the New World Order and such. I mean, it's just not very helpful. I'm not opposed to vaccines. I don't really believe all the conspiracies around them. So the internet might be good for sharing some forms of alternatives. But the internet can also explode into some destructive things as well. But the heart and soul of what we wanted to talk about today was, the internet has this ability to kind of make you feel more normal, to let you know that you're not the only person who is experiencing what you're experiencing. Because if you're like me, once again, someone who wasn't very socially interactive, maybe sometimes you feel weird. Maybe sometimes you feel different. But once you get online, you start connecting with other people. You don't seem that different. And you see people even posting on their Facebook status, someone's going through exactly what you're going through. And then you're just like, wow. I mean, it's just, thanks to the internet, this sounds really bizarre, but I just feel like the most ordinary person in the world. And there's nothing wrong with that. I know it's kind of a weird thing to say, but I mean, and the reason why is because, once again, I just connected online from people that were experiencing what I was experiencing. And it's highly, highly likely at this point that I'm not a schizophrenic. Sorry, whoever made that claim, but I mean, some people are just different, but only within our own sort of geographic circles. What do you think about anything that we've put forward today? What do you think about any of the claims that we've made? And I'm very curious what anybody has to say. And if you like this upload, you can hit the like button. And that's going to be all for me now. And until next time.